Hey everyone, Rapspank here, and welcome to Metacheck February 9th. This is the show where I look at the meta and talk about a couple of decks I find interesting. Just a couple of little things at the top here. We're only going to do 2 decks this week instead of the normal 3, and I think I'm going to do that going forward because I'm not really happy where the videos are ending up. They're just a little bit longer than I like. A little look behind the curtain. I used to script this and On the Grind. I used to do scripts. They took a lot of time during the week to make, and also kind of made the reading a little more robotic in my opinion. So I tried to shy away from scripts lately and just go off the cuff because I can honestly talk for hours and hours on end about Legends of Runeterra. So I've been trying to lean into that. But the problem is my videos are getting a bit rambly, and so they're going a lot longer than I personally would like. I know short and concise videos tend to be better, so that's my goal. So part of that is I'm going to go down to 2 decks a week on Metacheck for the time being. We'll see. If I ever feel like doing more, I'll do more. It'll be what it'll end up being, but I'm going to try to keep things quicker, and that's the goal. So without further ado, we're going to jump into our update from this week. So last week's On the Grind, that was Fiora Shen, and I've played it more, and there's a lot of really funny things. First off, this is, I think, the biggest update. I think I even beat the Fizzlusis with this one. Played 18 games, and the very last one, that 18th game, is what got me to Masters by beating Plaza Scouts. So we're in Masters now. The next On the Grind will be in Masters, so that's exciting. I'm finally going to have some On the Grind videos in Masters again. I'm also working on a bunch of other videos. So my win rate in Masters is pretty bad right now, but you'll find out. You'll find out why when that video comes out. But it's a blast from the past. It's a series I haven't done in a while, so. Yeah, that's coming. I have a video coming as well, hopefully this week, and in fact, hopefully in the next couple of days, and it'll just be talking about the decks that got me, or the decks that I played on the way to Masters, and what the win rates on them all were, and pictures of the decks, examples of it, what I did last season, and I also made a post on Twitter about it, so you can go there and see the win rates, but I'll do a video on it as well. But we played 18 games. We went 12-6. Which brings us to a win rate of 67%. And in fact, the overall win rate of the deck with 27 games played is 67%. The deck is consistency at its utmost. It's just an incredibly consistent deck. It's just going to do what it does, and it's going to be enough to beat most decks. So even the bad matchups, you can do pretty well in. Discard Aggro, for example, that's a matchup that feels kind of rough, 50-50 to sort of unfavored. I went 2-3 against it, so it's not like a horribly bad win rate. Fizzlusives, 1-1. Plaza Scouts, 2-0. Anivia Control, 2-0. Zoe Lee Sin, 3-0. I stomped through those decks. So, on the whole, great deck. Very, very good. Highly recommend it if you're looking to grind out. The deck continues to do well. I didn't play with the list at all. The list is exactly where I want it to be. I think it fits the meta extraordinarily well. It absolutely destroys Aphelios decks. I did not have a single Aphelios game in which things were even close. Aphelios decks tend to be long games, so sometimes they'd be like a 20-minute game, but I end the game with me killing them and I'm still at 20 health. So, yeah, Aphelios really isn't a challenge for this deck, at least in my personal experience. So, highly recommend it. Definitely give it a try. General thoughts on the meta? A lot of people are playing Aphelios. Particularly Aphelios Victor is the one I've seen probably the most. And a lot of people have been saying he's a really good card, which is pretty shocking because I have stomped that matchup with every deck I've played. I've never had a challenge, and I honestly think Aphelios is terrible. So I don't know why people are playing so much of him. I get that he gives you a lot of utility and a lot of card advantage because he gives you that first moon weapon, and every time you use it, you're going to get a new one. So it keeps your hand full of good things, and Coven Way is actually fairly strong. So Veiled Temple can be very problematic, but again, the only trouble I've ever had against Aphelios decks is playing bad decks. Just straight up bad decks. As I mentioned with the video coming later. So yeah, I am extraordinarily underwhelmed with Aphelios. So aside from Aphelios, I've been seeing a lot more Anivia Control. I've been seeing so much discard aggro. Like, I cannot state enough how much discard aggro I've seen. It's everywhere, and I get it. Like, especially at the start of a patch, it's very good to do an aggro deck like that because you're just going to roll over the competition in most games. So it's a really good way to climb ranked, especially when you expect people to be playing brand new cards like Aphelios that may or may not be good. Playing something cheese that can just run it over, pretty strong. I imagine that's why people have been talking so highly of Aphelios, is that with things like Coven Way and the Life Steal, it might be problematic for discard aggro. I don't really know. Haven't been playing discard aggro myself. I don't really plan to play it myself that much because I tend to prefer other aggro strategies where you're a little less mono themed, where you've got a few more options. So that said, it's definitely a good deck. Discard aggro is still doing good. I've seen people running stress testing in it. I don't think I would do that myself, but I could definitely see the appeal in running stress testing in that deck. It's I've seen it do some crazy things. That said, I think it's a pretty traditional list that's going to be your best bet. And then as for Anivia Control, I really like Anivia Control. It's always been my favorite control deck. Aside from maybe Peak Control this season was very, very fun. I might even be looking at it again just to see if it can hold up now, after the fact and in Masters. But yeah, those two are probably my favorite control decks of all time. I love the synergy of Anivia, and Gluttony is a really neat new addition to the deck, so I can see why people are playing it a lot lately. I'm not overly sold on it yet myself, because I do think there's a lot of decks that can really take advantage of it, and like I said, I stomped it with Fiora Shen every time, so I realize Fiora Shen's going to be one of the hardest decks for Anivia Control to probably deal with because of the fact that it's a mid-range deck with really big threats that get above its removal, and it has deny, so that's probably why. But I'm not wholly convinced yet, but I could definitely see why people would play it, and I can definitely see it doing fairly decent in the meta right now. So let's talk about the decks this week, and this is a perfect segue into Anivia Control. I wanted to talk about Anivia Control and Discard Aggro, not to spoil anything, but those two decks are ones that I've seen really spike this week. So even though I've talked about Discard Aggro 100 times, like I said, it's just I encountered probably two Discard Aggro decks for every one other deck. Like, it's insane how much Discard Aggro I saw. So it just seems wrong to not cover these decks. So first off, Anivia Control, what's new? Gluttony is the biggest new thing. You sacrifice the Last Breath follower, and then you summon something that costs one more. That might sound weird to people who haven't played the deck before, but the big thing here is Anivia's Last Breath at 6 mana. You can bank 3, go into that turn, play Anivia, Gluttony Anivia, get a Rekindler, which will get you back in Anivia, and now you're already at 2 Anivias. I'm not 100% sold on the single Harrowing, since it is one of the best cards in the deck, but I can see why right now in the meta people are going down on it, because you kind of need to have a lot of early game answers, and now there's a lot of Frostbite as well. Multiple Anivias is really good for the harsh winds, and that's kind of why we're running 3 Entreats. Aside from the fact that it is Anivia Control, we need Anivia, so having Entreat to get it is very important. But Flash Freeze is there as well, just to deal with Lee Sin, because it still exists, and it's definitely favored into the matchup, I would say, generally speaking. Vengeance is also good, and so is Ruination. Withering Wail is amazing against Discard Aggro. The box can catch a lot of weird things like Aphelios. Avalanche is really good. Vile Feast is good, as always. Now there's 2 Chroniclers, which is a little interesting. I personally think that perhaps I would drop a Chronicler for a Harrowing, but I get what it's trying to do. I usually ran 1 of Chroniclers, so I can see the argument for 2 as well. And the 2 Catalyst of Eons is probably really good, because Anivia controls a very slow deck, so being able to ramp a bit quicker and get to that leveled up Anivia faster is probably going to pay huge dividends. And the life gain is really good for the aggro matchups. So the basic gist with Anivia Control into the aggro matchups, look for things like Withering Wail, look for things like Avalanche. Catalyst can be good to buy you health. Don't worry about winning the game, just worry about living. Lots of early game life gain is critical. Stuff like Kindly Tavern Keeper, Vile Feast, and again, Avalanche and Withering Wail. Those are amazing for shutting down early game aggro decks. So that's what you want. You just want to deal with their strategy and not care in the slightest bit about how you're going to win. That sounds so weird, and so often I preach against this, but Anivia Control is that deck, where you're just like, in the aggro matchup, don't care, whatever, just deal with their thing, and we'll figure out a way to win. Into mid-range, Ruination. Avalanche can be good too, but Ruination's the big one. Box can be good too for catching like a turn 3 MF, for example. Then eventually you want to get to stuff like Kindly Tavern Keeper can trade with a lot of things. Even Avaros' Sentry actually can, so kind of look for the units, but Ruination is your big key against mid-range for just wiping the board. Against other control decks, Well, just look to outvalue them. We have one of the better late games because if we can get the engine going, we have so many Anivias. If they kill Anivia, they have to kill it twice. We have ways to even get it back once they do that. So things like Rekindler are going to be great. Harrowing is going to be great. Um, just in general, the one deck we're going to struggle a bit more against is probably like Feel the Rush, but in that case, look for things like multiple Anivias for the Harsh Winds. Flash Freeze can be good too. Look for ways to kill your own Anivia at fast speed too, so that if they have something that obliterates or something like that, if you're playing against, say, P Control and they're going to comet your Anivia, sacrifice it in response so you don't lose the Anivia and you still get the kill because you want your Anivia to die so you can bring it back with things like Rekindler and Harrowing. So look for the great late game value cards like Rekindler and Harrowing. Those are your biggest things into control. And that's just basically the idea with Anivia Control. For those who are unfamiliar, just try to get as many Anivias as you can, swing many times, grind them out with that Anivia attack trigger. That's the name of the game into most matchups, and like I said, the big thing right now is just be prepared for that aggro matchup and just deal with your opponent more than worry about winning. And then let's talk about discard aggro next. So, what's changed? The answer is not much. I've seen a couple of lists going around here. I think you're absolutely insane if you don't run Survival Skills. Survival Skills is honestly the best addition to this deck because just keeping Jinx alive one extra turn is so insanely powerful that I can't even begin to stress how important that is. So I would not even consider running this deck without Survival Skills. I've seen some big players in the game do it. I wouldn't even consider it in the slightest bit, and maybe that's wrong of me. Like I said, I don't play this deck a ton. I have played it a fair amount in the past. When I do play it now, I always play Survival Skills. I tend to prefer aggro decks with a little more depth, where there's a little more options and a little more room to play around your opponent. But this is, and always kind of has been, one of the fastest aggro decks on the block, and it can win most aggro matchups because you're usually faster against something like Fizz Elusives. You have flyers to block our elusives to block theirs, while just having this really potent early game where you can run them down quick, and then Jinx just grinds out the game so well against so many other decks. So that's why Survival Skill is so important, because just keeping Jinx alive is insanely powerful. You draw more cards every turn, you get that damage every turn off the rockets, you deal damage to their whole board, which is great into the other aggro matchups. It's just insanely good. So against aggro decks, just try to be faster. Have the most aggressive hand you can find, and don't even worry about dealing with their threats because you should be faster. They will probably have to deal with yours. Jinx is really good, as I mentioned, because Rocket will kill most of their things, and that can be super good for just running them out. And then Flame Chompers can help you assign blocks in the best possible way for you. And Crowd Favorite can be a great way to crush them. And House Spiders is insane in the aggro matchup because now you can be aggressive, and you're going to have multiple blockers for them. So you can be aggressive and defensive, and they're going to pay more than you are. So just be the faster deck. Against mid-range, look for that aggressive early game, and then probably your best bet into that matchup is to look for Jinx to win the late game. Poro can be good for the Flyers, especially if you have vision to pump their power, but definitely look for Draven and Jinx. That's your best cards into the mid-range matchup. You do want some of the early game stuff to run them down early, but since Draven can attack safely, Jinx can attack safely, and Jinx can win the late game by just blasting them with rockets, those are definitely your best cards in that matchup. Crowd Favorite can be good too if you could build a big board state, but just look for your big value cards and try to do a ton of damage early so you can close out the game with powerful spells like Get Excited or the Rocket. Against Control, just go really fast and hope they don't have Withering Wail. That's ultimately what it is, so try to run them down as quick as possible and then have a Jinx. That's the other best card because, as I mentioned, those rockets will just grind your opponent out super quick. So just look to deal maximum amount of damage as fast as possible and then slam a Jinx with an empty hand and just start rocketing them every turn and hope that's enough to close out the distance. Control is definitely going to be one of your scarier matchups because right now Anivia Control is so big and it's got so many ways to deal with your threats, so it really is critical you get as much damage in as early as you can. Don't be saving a Visions because you're like, well, turn 3 I'm going to play Draven. If you can go like Saw Night Urchin pitching Jury Rig, plus Arena Battlecaster, and then you've got like Poro Cannon in hand. Use that Visions early just to get that force damage in before your opponent can Avalanche. So look for the most damage you can get, and that's basically it. So, yeah, thanks for watching the video. There's a link for both of these decks in the description below if you want to check them out yourself. And if you enjoyed the video, leave a like, comment below, and subscribe for more videos just like it.